Welcome to the Coach's Table Podcast, where coaches come to grow personally and professionally through real-world application and online education. What's going on, guys? Wow, the week is flying by. March Madness is literally right around the corner. Selection Sunday is coming up here in a couple of less than a week. And what's really cool for me right now is seeing all these coaches, win a conference championship and posting about it, and reaching out to them and celebrating their success, because I think there's so many amazing coaches and players doing great things, and I think it's awesome to see. Unfortunately, on the flip side of that coin, though, there's people that are taking those L's and they're going home, and some people, unfortunately, are going to lose their job, and that's tough, right? And that's the business side of the house. But the great thing is March Madness is coming up, so I think we're going to see some really good games here real soon, and I'm excited for that. But guys, before we get into today's episode, first let me say it this way. I think you're going to get an absolute masterclass today from the guest that we have on. He's extremely knowledgeable in all aspects of nutrition, training. He's been at a multitude of levels, both collegiate and professional, has been doing this for over a decade, and has now transitioned into more of a consulting role. But the knowledge that he continues to put out, both online and then in person, and how he helps people and what he wants to do, I think is absolutely fascinating. I think this is the route to go, the way to go. And I'm super excited to have him on. But before I introduce him, guys, if you're listening on Spotify, it'd be really easy for you to give a quick review. It literally takes less than 10 seconds for you to do. Just in the upper right-hand corner, there's 3 dots that you can leave a review. Would absolutely appreciate that. If you are watching on YouTube, because we drop the full-length episodes on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and then drop a comment below. And if you have any additional questions from this episode, because I'm sure that you're going to, drop the questions in the comment section in the YouTube below. Would much appreciate that. And lastly, share with a friend. The only way that this thing grows is by you guys sharing with friends, by bringing guests on that actually help educate and not only move the profession forward, but give you actionable tools for you to help your athletes and yourself. And so with that, I'm super excited. Mr. Pratik Patel, man, how are you, man?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for taking the time to come on. I think, we were kind of talking offline, but man, I think what you bring to the table, how you approach it and differentiate yourself is extremely fascinating. And, that's why I was like, I'd love to sit down and talk to you for a little bit about it. And so super excited about that. And so thank you for your time. If you guys don't know him, he has been at Kansas State, Michigan State, Oregon, and then with the Giants, both as a dietitian, sports nutritionist, and then also is S&C qualified as well. So quick 30-second skinny, how did you get into it? Why did you get into training athletes, sports performance?
Yeah, I've always loved sports as a kid. Played basketball, pretty much in soccer growing up. And like a lot of kids went through a very sedentary period where gained a lot of weight heading into high school, which ideally is not what you want to do if you want to have somewhat of a social life, be somewhat popular, which I wasn't. And just felt really out of place. This Indian kid in Kansas, which makes me even more out of place. Trying to figure my way out as a teenager, back in the 90s. So recognizing that this path I was on was not going to yield me any, satisfaction, friends, or success, I decided to just figure out how to train myself, knowing that a lot of my issues were self-imposed. So it's not genetic, it was epigenetic, as a lot of people don't necessarily see that eye. It's like, look, I stopped playing sports. I started eating mass quantities of junk food and sitting on my butt, and I gained a ton of weight as a tiny little scrawny Indian kid. So really just started reading magazines, the Flex magazines, the men's health magazines, trying to figure out what can I do to get in shape. I wanted to look like the people on the cover, obviously not knowing that they were geared out of their minds. Got on a track, just started running one day. Someone's like, hey, if you want to get stronger, build muscle, you probably need to lift weights. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. I'm going to figure out what to do in the weight room. And hey, you probably should start thinking about what you're eating, because if you don't pair both of those together, you might not see the results that you want. So I'm like, okay, let me try to figure out how to eat. So over the course of a couple of years, just really got a chance to fall in love with training and nutrition, everything health related, transform myself, got back into sports. So back into track, football, really loved the training aspect. I wasn't a good athlete, so that's, to be honest. And the funny thing was I was a dual sport athlete, but I still sucked. So there's no correlation between how many sports you play. Like if I was better at more things, I would have played all year round. but I just capped it at those two because they seemed to be the easiest, and the seasons were in different time points of the year.
Yeah.
Figured out that I was really into this, wanted to continue studying it. So when I went to Kansas State, I transitioned into dietetics and wanted to finish out my time, become a registered dietitian, and maybe work in a gym or a training facility, helping people train and do meal plans. I thought that was the end all be all, but continued on in that path, went through a dietetic internship at the Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville, did some sports nutrition stuff for the first time and realized like, oh, there are careers where you could work in a team, as a consultant or as a strength and conditioning coach that does nutrition. And I'm like, wow, that is insane, but I'm not ready. So, moved back to Kansas, got my hands on some volunteer opportunities with people that were working in collegiate sport and training centers just to see what life was like. Knew that I still had a long way to go. And someone was like, hey, if you want to market yourself a little bit better, if you want to be a better practitioner, if you have a background in exercise physiology and kinesiology, that kind of sets the foundation for being a strength and conditioning coach. And I said, okay, that sounds like a good idea. So I went back to K-State, did a graduate teaching assistantship, and started, coaching. Just, and again, if you can coach a group of college athletes or college kids, you can coach, elderly people, you can coach people in the community, you have the opportunity to coach anybody because you really tailor your styles to what people need. So that's where I started. It wasn't directly with college athletes. And then actually at that time I was a dietitian. So started working with the men's basketball team, volunteer work, whatever they needed, I was going to do it. I don't care, stock, clean, whatever, to get some experience. And that's where I got my first opportunity to deal with college athletes to see, like, can I make an impact or not? What does it take? How much time does it take? What do they go through? What do they even care about? Do they even care about anything I'm saying or telling them?
Yeah.
And, it's definitely a real eye opener for me. So that was a good experience just to see, like, this is the path I want to continue on.
Yep.
Finished out my time at K-State, opportunity at Michigan State for a few years, which was great. Really, it's kind of like the school of hard knocks back then with the very old school athletic department, Coach D'Antonio, Coach Manny. Really enjoyed my time there and was becoming a better practitioner, but also doing some coaching, holistic youth coaching on the side with the Mid-Michigan community athletes.
Sure.
So really being very well-rounded. So it wasn't just a hyper-nutrition focus. We're doing a lot of different things. We're doing speed training, agility, mental skills, nutrition, strength and conditioning, and wanted to continue on and take on more responsibility. It just wasn't in the cards right then and there at Michigan State. They weren't ready for it, which is nothing wrong with that. And then an opportunity at University of Oregon came about to run a department, try to get integrated into sports medicine, sports science, and technology and performance, which was great because doing a lot of things that I hadn't done before and doing it at a high level with an athletic department that had really good success, not just in football and track, but a variety of different sports. Yeah. So again, just trying to figure out how to integrate my department with everybody else and manage those expectations. So a couple good years, one down bad year, and changing supervisors, changing head coaches, and recognizing like, okay, do I want to just stay nutrition and, sports science technology, or do I miss the coaching aspect of it? Which I did.
Sure. Yeah.
See things not go the way I want it to, and then the kids are asking for it and they're asking you for it. And I'm like, look, that's not my job here. I'm not trying to overstep boundaries, but I do miss it. And it's what I want to continue on to do. And, there's an opportunity with the New York Giants in a dual role, very unique. So that's kind of the role that I wanted. I didn't want to just go to the NFL to check a box to say I'm their sports nutritionist dietitian, but they don't give me any autonomy to do anything.
Yeah.
Obviously I was the first one the Giants had full time. So really showing them like what was possible. So it's not about grocery store tours and talking about food on a plate and like, no, I do assessments. I use the data. I use it to inform me. I talk to the players. I spend more time around them than anybody else because I'm in the weight room with them. We're out on the field. I'm in the locker room, I'm everywhere. They probably got sick of me, which is okay.
Yeah, literally though, right?
A small amount of time to make a big impact because you could either lose your job in 1 year or the players are gone. The roster turns over. So really navigating that, using the experiences I've had in the past to try to have success, working amongst some really well-known people in their specific fields too, just learning as much as I can. The team didn't do well, but my learning grew significantly, which was great. So again, it would have been nice to make it to the playoffs or beyond, get those bonus checks. But at the same time, there are probably people at other teams that got that opportunity but didn't get the chance to really grow or force themselves to grow in a short amount of time, which, I was very grateful for. So, was with them until 2020, just made the decision to kind of transition out and, kind of really reevaluate things to see like what is it that I want to do and what makes me happy, which, kind of brings me to now.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think a lot of what you said there is there's so much depth to that, right? Because, going from K-State, which I lived in Manhattan for 2 years and I loved it. It was really cool. I was there for the Army, not for any sports, but but going from, K-State to Michigan to Oregon to, the Giants, and then saying, kind of asking the hard questions, like, do they even care about what I talk about? Like right now, it feels like athletes care more about like what shoes you walk in wearing rather than like the information that, is actually going to affect their performance. They care more about like, are you tatted or are you not, right? Like it's very trivial stuff for them to be like, how can I get a connection with you right away? How can we kind of build and foster that relationship so that when you do tell me something, it actually lands rather than what some people do right away is, they just don't build that connection and they're like, this is my title, this is what I do. Give me, let me tell you the information. Let's go on a grocery tour. And then they're like, well, how successful was that? And it's like, well, it wasn't, like it's very interesting to see that. And so kind of getting right into it because I think you have a lot to offer. And so, my first one for you is like, okay, what do you think we still get wrong in the sports performance world, sports nutrition world? Because, kind of like we alluded to, like, you said you use data, like should athletes be tracking their food? Is that something that we should have them doing? Some will say yes, some will say no, but if we're looking at data to make informed decisions, because at the end of the day, like the data doesn't lie. And now, bad inputs is obviously going to equal bad outputs, but, first and foremost, what do we still get wrong? And then, if we want to spin off of that, like should athletes track their food? Is that something that we should have them do, professional or collegiate?
Yeah, I think if you're looking at sports performance in general, you have so many things that contribute to the success of an athlete. Some of the things I like posting about and break it down more so from football terms is we want our athletes to be successful. We say performance is probably winning a game, really. Like at the end of the day, that's all that really matters. You could have
the only thing.
An amazing performance, but lose. Some basketball players, some football players have had these. I mean, you just look at the Super Bowl, Jalen Hurts balled out, but they still lost.
Yep.
You look at, NBA Finals series of the past, LeBron has put up ridiculous stats, but unfortunately he's lost more than he's won. So at the end of the day, does that really even matter? Are we going to hang our hats on great performances, or is it all about wins and losses? So yeah, wins and losses are great. Now we want to continue to kind of work backwards. So again, I didn't make up this equation, but I like to use it a lot. Like performance equals your capacity minus the fatigue. So if you have been training and you have the skill to be able to operate at a certain level, you want to make sure that that is where you're at as often as possible. And you don't go from, hey, I'm a 4-3 guy in underwear, but the second pads come on and I'm required to, sprint for the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, all the way. We know how many explosive efforts some of these players get.
Oh, yeah.
That drop off is significant. And mentally, I can't function because I can't make the quick decisions in time, or I just get too tired that I know what to do, but my body's just not in the appropriate shape. So that's where the fatigue part comes in.
Right.
So everybody has their own specific bias on what it needs to be. Like, oh, we need to be tougher. We need to be stronger. We need to be faster. We need to be X, Y, and Z. It's probably a lot of that. Overall, there are certain things that each individual athlete could potentially benefit from and improve upon as a team as a whole, but then we can break it down based on positional need and then what each individual athlete needs. But at the same time, what we see, and I think the biggest thing really that we're failing on is identifying what keeps athletes healthy and trying to prevent and mitigate, and you can't prevent injuries, but mitigate that injury risk. Everybody thinks like, oh yeah, these athletes need to get stronger. I'm like, well, athletes have been stronger than they ever have. Athletes are stronger at a younger age than they ever have been. With the training I was doing in high school, like I was weak. I never got injured. We played 2 sports year round, 3 sports year round.
Yeah.
You wouldn't hear about many hamstring injuries or soft tissue injuries. Maybe a twisted ankle, somebody rolled up on me. You can't do anything about that. ACLs were never a thing with male and female athletes way back when. Like, I can't even imagine. And everybody was playing sports year round. So it wasn't like there's this big boom of parents frustrating their kids. That shit's been going on forever. Because I just didn't have parents that did that, but I have a lot of friends that played multiple sports since they were like in elementary school.
Yeah. I grew up playing literally every sport possible. So, wrestled for 7 years, played football for 16, basketball, baseball, track and field, gymnastics. Like, I don't remember a time where there was like, you're not doing something like sport related. And if we weren't at practice, we were outside playing. We had like a small front yard. We were playing front yard football or like tag football, or we had a elementary school next to us, like a couple of blocks, and we were out there hitting baseballs. We were like, if you weren't at practicing, like you were just out there having fun doing it and like constantly playing and constantly doing a multitude of things. And we would put our trampoline under our basketball court and do like 360, between the leg dunks, like, because we were just kids just being active and like we all enjoy sports. So like, that's what we did. But there wasn't ever a like hyperfixation of like, I'm only a football player. I only do that. Right. Like it was just like, go outside and play, like literally just go play. And it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's so true. And nowadays, kids just don't have that luxury because of a variety of different things. Like things are always going to change, but they're just not doing the things that we did as we grew up, which I think is unfortunate.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about performance, obviously we know they have to be bigger, stronger, faster, but at the end of the day, you can keep them doing what they need to be doing and healthy more so and as resilient as possible. That's the main thing. So now we see injury rates that are through the roof, even though we have more of an emphasis and focus on data monitoring, tracking, advancements in sports medicine, the access and ability to get, food, nutrition, and supplements, but there's still something that's going on that's failing. And I think fundamentally people just don't know what the actual makeup of health means and all the different things that athletes are exposed to and go to that are negatively influencing from a variety of different things, whether it's they're overloaded, overworked, too much workload, and they're under recovered. They're just internal systems are not ideal or optimized, where they're just dealing with way too much stress. Cortisol is elevated. They're sympathetically stressed. HRVs is continuously tanking. We know that there are strong associations between decreases over time and increasing incidences of soft tissue injury and other injuries. Like the quality of food is still pretty poor. Intake is poor because now you have easy access to all the junk food, ultra processed food everywhere. Like I see this a lot on Twitter, but when I was in high school, drinking an energy drink wasn't really even a thing because they weren't out. Yeah. But a lot of coaches are saying like, look, this is an epidemic. Like they are drinking all these different types of drinks nonstop. So they're probably not drinking the things that they need to. They're probably staying away from the food that they probably should be eating. Nothing wrong with the school lunch, but are these kids even eating that? Are they going through the a la carte line? Are they staying up too late, sleeping poorly? Because now you have a phone, tablet, computer, screen in every kid's room at younger ages. And it doesn't change when they go to middle school, high school, college, pro. They're staying up. They're getting desensitized. They're too much blue light exposure. They're not taking care of themselves very well. And over time, it's kind of not an if, but when is something negatively going to happen that just produces an excessive amount of stress that the body just isn't resilient enough to handle it. So there's nothing wrong with being stressed. We know that appropriate amounts of stress with recovery is how we grow. Yeah. You want to get stronger, you got to have progressive overload. You want to get smarter, you can't do the same problems and equations. If you want to, handle life, you have to go through some adversity. But not But I think that's what's happening with these kids. They don't have appropriate outlets and they're getting exposed to a lot of these things. And now it's transitioning and bombarding them going from high school to college, to the professional level. And they haven't developed the habits to be able to recognize, like, these are the things I should be doing as a human and an athlete that are going to push me in the right direction, that are going to help my performance. But these are the dozen to 2 dozen to 3 dozen things that I'm experiencing, my environment, my behaviors, my habits, that are holding me back that I have no clue about. Parents aren't aware of it. Coaches aren't aware of it because you're not with your kids every single hour of every single day. So once they leave, like, they'll do everything that they need to when they're in close proximity, and you can at least control as much of that as possible, whether it's the training, the recovery, the nutrition, the hydration, supplementation, all that. But there's a whole world of things that go on outside that we don't know about. And if we just turn a blind eye to that and expect them to figure it out themselves, they're not going to. I've assessed 12 professional athletes in the past 2 months, and only one of them really, I would say, I'm not really going to worry that much about you. Everybody else is like, I want to try to educate you to see, or hopefully you recognize some of the things that you're doing that are potentially going to hold you back as you go throughout your career. Because I've seen this, like, unless you're a genetic outlier, you're a freak of all freaks that can get away with some of that stuff. But even at the professional level, those are few and far between. Everybody talks about the 1%. Well, yeah, you can do the 1% when you handle all of the basics first and foremost. But outside of that, like, to me, those are big swings and misses when it comes to the performance side. And obviously there's a lot that can be improved with nutrition as well. Just it's so blatantly obvious to me too, when everybody's talking about injuries and these teams are investing in more screening and tech. I'm like, that's not what's causing injuries. You have all these different factors that you're not thinking about or trying to measure or educate your athletes on. And it's slowly eroding them from the inside out to where they're not robots, they're not superhumans. Like, they will break at some point.
Yeah. So I think there's about 18,000 different tangents we can go on just from that like, you know what I'm saying? Because it's so multifaceted, right? And we could, my biggest question then is okay, so what should recovery look like? Because, I mean, I think you talk about this a lot as well. And I think this will then kind of roll into a supplementation aspect. But, with players, with the exposure today to, and I'm as bad with this as everybody else, is like, I'm on my phone until I go to bed. And I'm not going to say I'm on my phone until I go to bed. And then I'm like, oh, my eyes hurt. Like, I should put this away and I should probably get some sleep. And I'm like, oh crap, it's midnight. I got to be up at 6:30 or whatever the case may be. Right. How should we help our athletes get educated in this? Because, it's one thing just to say, don't be on your phone. It's one thing to say, put your phone away an hour before you go to bed. And even though that's technically right, and we should tell them, like, having them actually do that now is a different game. So from your aspect, if we're talking about phones in recovery or just recovery as a whole, but like, what are some other ways, or how did you and how do you get your clients and your professional athletes to start to implement these things? And I'm a huge advocate of environment. Like, and we can talk about, I read the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, and I thought it was absolutely fascinating. And it just goes to show, like, how important the environment is and, like, the things that we don't think about. But, and we can talk about that too. But how do we get these athletes then, or people in general, because it's just not athletes, it's everybody. But how do we get these, individuals to start to implement, the things that we see research correlating to, besides just saying, like, don't do that, right? Because, like, if you're a parent, you say, don't go eat this food, like, what is the kid going to do? They're literally going to go eat that food,
And again, it's not easy. And
yes,
you'll have people that are very interested in it, and that's the difficult thing when you're working with a team. Like, these athletes aren't coming to you. Like, they are saddled with you. Like, look, I'm a part of this team. This is my strength coach, or this is my, trainer or whomever. As opposed to, you have clients that are struggling with something and they want something done because they know that something's wrong. You might have the solutions to be able to tailor it for them that speaks to what they need. So it's definitely a lot easier from one side to the other, but really what it comes down to is just understanding that specific athlete and trying to get into their shoes and in their mindset of, this is what they experience and go through, on a typical day leading up to that. Why is it that why are they on their phone? Is there something that they've done for a really long time? Is there something that they feel like they're missing out on? Is there something that entertains them? Is this their way of relaxing and calming down? Because there are athletes that can put their phone down and, set the alarm and just go to bed and still not get the recovery benefits. Then you have others that can be on their phone until, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, put the phone down and, get good quality sleep and HRV bounce back up. Like, oh, wow, an anomaly because research says if you get blue light exposure in the evening, suppressed cortisol is going to be elevated. So I don't think there's a perfect situation, but I think really explaining it to them, to the why, and not telling them not what to do, is be like, here, I'm going to craft something specifically for you. You know, if you want to talk about the evening routine or the morning routine, see what they're automatically doing and making just small suggestions to say, okay, I get an idea of what your evenings look like. And I know what's important to you in the evening. For some, it's, hey, I need to have family time. You know, I need time with my wife. I need time with my kids, put them in bed. And then it's the only time I get with my wife. So we watch a movie. So we talk, stay up late, whatever it is. It's okay.
Yeah.
Do that. But I need you to get X, Y, and Z done prior to that. And then when, you know, this time frame hits, if you've got to wake up at this time, you know, hopefully aim for 3 days out of the 7 that you go to sleep at this time. You don't have to be perfect, but my challenge to you is this. And I know you can do it, but you have to prove to me you can. So a lot of athletes, a lot of people, they are competitive.
Yeah.
And if you give them just a small one thing to work on, say over the course of the next week, I need you to do this, you know, maybe get a red light blocking app on your phone. Maybe that's just step 1. So then they can be on their phone, but they just don't have that exposure if they are having issues falling asleep.
Right.
Or if they know that they just spend too much time because they're entertained, it's like, hey, there are apps that kind of shut down and prevent you from accessing others at this time if you set it in advance. And then it'll give you full access the next morning. So guess what? You're not going to miss out on anything, but try it out for a couple of days to see what that looks like. So hopefully if there is some compliance within that, and then they wake up and say, oh, well, you know, hey, I felt really good. Or, you know, I subjectively track how I sleep. I woke up and I mentally, I think I slept really well. And generally that correlates pretty strongly with what actual message you're going to get from a wearable, or if they're wearing something like an Aura and they start seeing those changes, like being able to see the objective data, that's their own data, is very, very powerful. Now it's never going to be perfectly accurate, you know, but that's the purpose of having these types of devices, is to learn things that they would have never learned before. Like we can say, go to bed. You're going to get better sleep. You're going to do this, that, and the other. If you create this evening routine, but until they can actually combine that subjective and objective result, it's hard for them to just automatically think like, oh, this makes sense. Same thing like, hey, you probably shouldn't eat at 12 o'clock and then try to go to bed, or don't eat a plate of wings at 11:15 p.m. because you're not going to feel well. You could constantly complain that you have trouble sleeping. You have low energy in the morning, but they do it anyway. But maybe they get a device and they wear it and they say like, oh, hey, look, I did that last night and my numbers and my scores weren't very good. It's like, okay, well, hey, this is what I want you to do over the course of the next couple of days. Don't eat at 11:15, but let's bring that last large meal earlier up. And if you want to have something, I'm going to give you an alternative that, you know, might be sweet, like some yogurt with some honey and some like chocolate chips in it, whatever. And then they do that, and over the course of 2 days, like, oh shoot, hey, I feel much better, and look, my sleep score is better, my recovery went up, and my HRV is back up. Can you explain what that means? Like, you know, just being able to speak individually to that person. Now, if you're dealing with dozens and dozens and dozens of athletes, that becomes a lot more difficult. You can give service level, you know, a quick 2-minute presentation. Hey, if you're interested in learning more, we can talk more one-on-one and we can craft something specific to you. But to think we're going to change every athlete's habit at any level is going to be impossible.
Yeah, 100%. And so like so I have an Aura ring, and I'm a fan of it. I will say, I think it does a pretty decent job. Obviously, I recognize and acknowledge that it's not perfect, and no technology piece will ever be perfect, right? For those that say, you know, because at times I'll say like, maybe I feel really good, but my objective numbers then, you know, don't match that. Maybe my objective numbers are pretty low. My HRV is tanked, or my sleep score is bad, or my readiness is bad. But I'm like, I feel actually pretty good, right? Like, now I feel like that happens pretty often for individuals. And so what's a struggle for me at times is when people then say, well, you know, this says and this is not a bash at Aura, but my Aura, my Whoop, my whatever insert technology company says that I didn't recover, so then I'm just going to take today off. Like, my question then is like, how much stock should we put into that? and we recognize it's better to have data than no data. But how much stock should we then put into that? Or should we listen to it? Or should we just say, like, no matter what we utilize, like our internal feeling, and if I was to do a quick, like, how do I feel today on a scale of 1 to 10, like, should we listen to that more? Or like, because I feel like everybody kind of struggles with that aspect of it, you know?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's happened to me too.
Yeah.
And some of the people I work with, I always go like, hey, wake up, subjectively tell yourself, like, how do you feel?
Yeah.
And it's not the end all be all. If you say like, hey, I feel crummy, it doesn't mean you're going to have a crummy day. It's like, look, why do I feel this way? Was it, hey, I just stayed up too late, I was watching a Netflix show, or I was just on the phone, or I got bad news and it just kind of, negatively reverberated with me. So as you know, like the real world can really tank our nervous system a lot more than a really tough workout can.
Yeah.
In a short, like instantaneous, like you get a bad phone call, something happens, finance, money, whatever, relationships, and you're just like on high alert, you're stressed, your heart rate's elevated, like instantaneously, which, again, I think that real feel is really, really important, because there have been times where I've woken up, felt really good, looked at the scores, like scores don't say anything. I'm like, hey, mentally, it doesn't matter. I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to continue on with what I need to do. And there have been times where I've woken up, scores are great, but physically I'm like, I do not feel good.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm just going to listen to my body and just say, hey, I'm not going to do the planned workout or what I had on the schedule for today. I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to make sure that, I move around, maybe do a little bit of zone 2 stuff, foam roll, really well, hydrate, make sure I'm, handling the things that are within my control. And I know tomorrow will be better, and I'm going to get right back to it. So again, there are always, like, I kind of post some of this stuff. There are going to be days when you wake up, when it's a scheduled workout day, you don't feel like it, even though there's nothing really wrong with you. Your levels aren't crazy low. It's like, dude, just get up and do it.
It's a pretty average day,
Yeah, that's always going to happen. Not every day is going to be perfect. And I think that's what some people lose when we're talking about this optimization piece is our health is never static. Even if we do all the things that we should be doing, maybe we take a cross-country flight, or you're hanging around family or people with a lot of kids, and you just happen to get sick. Like, nobody goes through life 100% never getting sick, or never, traveling or going to altitude, or, having a bad workout or tweaking something in the gym. It's, can I turn to certain things that I know that can help me build that resiliency with my health, to say like, oh, I'm going to eat this large pizza at 10 o'clock at night, knowing full and well, I'm going to have a horrible night of sleep. But tomorrow I get back and take care of business, because I don't want to live a life that doesn't get a chance to experience fun things, or stay up late, or, have an alcoholic drink, or whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we're talking specifically working with athletes, I think another thing too is like your circadian rhythm too. I think that's really huge. Like, sports are just not played in the area that you live in. These, athletes are consistently flying, traveling across the country on buses, literally to other countries, right, to play. And so like that also plays a huge role into it. And now another question from that is, from a recovery standpoint, I know you speak a lot and you're a firm believer in magnesium. Give them kind of the quick why magnesium is important for individuals, and particularly how it helps them recover. Because I think a lot of people don't really understand magnesium, the benefits of it. And I think a lot of them are like, let me just go grab my melatonin. And it's not that maybe melatonin is bad, but maybe there's better things out there than just melatonin.
Yeah, well, magnesium, it's one of those essential micronutrients that we need to get on a daily basis. So, it acts in hundreds of different reactions in the body as a coenzyme. I think the main things that really provide a lot of benefit are its effect with ATP production. It helps control blood glucose levels, and it has a really strong, powerful effect on the nervous system in terms of helping people be a little bit more calm, relaxed, aiding the parasympathetic nervous system. So if we need it daily, and in stressful situations increase the utilization and need for it, then we're going to deplete ourselves. So if we can get enough through the diet, which it's possible but not easy, and if we have increased, if you're an athlete that's constantly stressed, not only physical stress, but all the different stresses of life, you're traveling, you're sweating out a lot, your workloads are super high. Maybe you're supplementing with a variety of different things, vitamin D, you're on medications, things that are just going to increase the need for more. If you're not providing it, then the body's just not going to function the way it needs to. So it can help, it can break down from bone to absorb more to keep serum levels intact. One really good test that you can see if your mag levels are ideally what they need to be, looking at RBC magnesium, so how much magnesium is bound to our blood cells. Most people end up becoming pretty deficient if they have a poor diet, if they're stressed, and they've never really looked at supplementation. So there's a lot of positive studies looking at its use, the forms that are ideal and optimal for ingestion, glycinate, bisglycinate, threonate, and malate. And then for a topical or a spray, chloride is really good, just because you can absorb it transdermally, and not just specifically by consuming it, because the amount of elemental magnesium that's in even like hundreds of milligrams of a high quality source would still only yield a small amount. So getting to the optimal levels does take time.
Yeah.
So that's why, looking at blood levels of athletes and people just to see, are you within that range? And are you getting magnesium in the diet? If you're not, and the answer is no to both of those, then obviously the only way to really get levels where they need to be is via supplementation.
Yeah. So, okay, 2 questions off of that. Should athletes be getting their blood levels checked, both professional and or collegiate? Because I feel like there's a struggle at the collegiate level to get the internals of an individual. And then at the professional level, I feel like they're just so much more free to make decisions. Like at the collegiate level, I feel like, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to implement this. A lot of times they don't really have a choice, right? Like at the professional level, if we want to do something where it's like, hey, we would love for you to start wearing an Oura ring, like a team's going to purchase some, they can say, I'm not going to do that, right? Like they kind of have more freedom and flexibility with that. But should we get more health markers, internal health markers with our athletes to be able to individualize it a little bit more and be like, hey, U5 need supplementation with magnesium, U5 are deficient in vitamin D, or how does that work? How do we do that? Can we do that legally and ethically as well? Because we know the internal biomarkers are something that's extremely important.
Yeah, I think it's very valuable because everybody's so different. Like not only from what their current status is, like if you even took it a step further, you could potentially do this in the college level. You can't do it in the NFL because you can't test genetic markers. They can do that themselves individually. So I have a lot of clients that end up just to learn more about what is my genetic makeup. Am I predisposed to something? Am I naturally deficient in certain vitamins and micronutrients? So I have to be a little bit more conscious about what I eat or what I supplement with. Can I methylate? Do I need different forms of B vitamins? I mean, there's a long list of things that we can look at, which make a lot of sense when you do get those tests and you know somebody's health status, and it explains a lot. It doesn't mean that you're automatically going to be injured or unhealthy. It's just you are now empowered to know that if you don't do anything about it, then you're a little bit more at risk in a variety of different areas. In college, like you said, it is a lot easier to just say like, hey, we're doing this testing, we're doing this nutrition genome sequencing, we're doing these blood tests. I think the difficult thing is a lot of physicians and sports medicine staffs don't want to do that, and the costs are pretty high. Or if they do some generic screening, it's once a year or once somebody comes in as a freshman or a transfer, just to see like, oh, they're sickle cell positive or anything else like that. It's very surface level stuff, and it doesn't really give you some insight on, let's look at their hormone markers, let's look at their glucose control, let's look at inflammatory markers, let's take a deep dive and see, is this person actually healthy? And for the most part, that term healthy gets thrown around quite a bit, where people don't necessarily know how can you quantify or qualify it. And if you're comparing it to just generic levels your doctor can get, your blood levels are compared to everybody else, and you get those averages and you get these ranges. But we know the majority of people around the planet are not healthy at all. They're not just overweight, they're
obese.
More obese. And I wouldn't want to optimize, and again, that word optimize, I wouldn't want to try to improve the health status of an athlete compared to somebody else with just some general guidelines. So the tough thing is, and it's what I do with each one of my clients, is we try to take really deep dives into the blood work we do only twice a year. It's not an astronomical cost. You don't have to do it every 3 months or 4 months, but it informs us like this is where you're at. And this might explain why you're having issues with losing your hair because your thyroid's jacked up, or you have iron overload, or you have iron underload, your vitamin D isn't where it needs to be. Your 24-hour cortisol levels are just way too high, so you're experiencing way too much stress from a variety of different areas. Let's hammer down and figure what that is. You have some vascular inflammation because your CRP levels and your like apolipoBs are through the roof. Your homocysteine level is so high. It's like we need to do something about this now, because that is not a good indicator of health, or there's some dysregulation in the methylation or waste pattern in the body. So this is why you're not able to clear out things or produce energy the way that we want to. And again, that there are urine tests as well that can kind of look at some of these things. The genetic test is one time. You don't have to do it over and over again because your genes don't change. It's either a spit or a saliva swab. But getting a reputable test can sometimes be difficult. And then the results, interpreting them, because they'll give you like 80 pages of
per individual.
Yeah, per individual. And it's like, so I do love learning that, because it's very minimal time points during the year. You don't do it all the time. And at the professional level, when I was in the NFL, we would do one blood draw during physicals, which is at the tail end of off-season training, which didn't make any sense to me. It's like, these guys come in April. We're doing this blood draw like at the 10th or 11th week, like right before they go out the door. So I don't have time with them in person to be like, hey, this is what we got. I need you to improve your omega-6 ratio. Your 3% index was low. Your vitamin D was 17 or 11. I've seen some really bad ones, which is crazy. And then they go off wherever they go for 5 weeks, and they come back for training camp. And it's like, we could have had so much more time. So when I was with the Giants, I'm like, look, I can't force you to do these blood draws right now at the beginning of off-season training, but you are going to have to do one mandatory, because everybody has to get a physical by the end of training camp or mini camp. So I'm like, hey, this first week, offense, you're up. You guys can come in, get it done first thing in the morning. I need you fasted. Defense, you guys for the next day. And I think it was like the compliance was great outside of the rookies, because we didn't have them, and anybody else that got picked up. We had like 90% of the team done, and then the rest they finished up, at the tail end of off-season training. And then we made it available to them in season. Now, we did one draw each month. So, over the course of a football season, it's 4 months.
Wow. Yeah.
So we give the opportunity to do one. I just wanted everybody to try to do at least one, if not two. And I think we had, at the end of it, I'm trying to remember the numbers, but it went from very like 2 athletes on the entire team that did it to the majority of the team getting regular draws, just to see like, how are their bodies changing? What are they experiencing? Because you have these research questions.
Yeah, 100%.
Season, what happens with the inflammatory markers? What happens with vitamin D status? What happens with cortisol? What happens to the testosterone? What happens to all this other stuff? Because that stuff's been studied, but it's in like D2 populations. It hasn't been in an NFL season with a team that's not doing well, that lives in this part of the country geographically, that has access to one of the biggest famous cities in the world.
Yes.
And, they're completely different. It's a different situation. So I've always been a fan of that. You can't force the players in the NFL to do it, but a lot are becoming more and more aware of their own individual health status, which I think is great.
Well, yeah, and I think it's interesting because we take a surface level approach with it in the collegiate sector, and this is what I mean is like we do like an in-body scan, before the season, after the season, to see the effects of the season, which gives us, a couple of metrics, skeletal muscle mass, and then obviously that's body composition and stuff, right? To be like, this is what the season's doing to our athletes, but it doesn't answer the question of why. Like, what internal things are causing that to happen, right? Is it, increased stress due to travel? Is it the thyroid is not working? Is it, there's so many other questions that go with that. Did testosterone decrease, right? Like, there's so many questions that go with it. So I understand from a collegiate standpoint, from a time standpoint, and that probably does happen in the NFL as well, or professional sports. Like, hey, we're going to use this in body scan, and this is what we're going to do, and like it's a quick and easy thing for us, but it doesn't give us the in-depth look. And yeah, I think twice a year is sufficient. Personally, like, I think if you come in, let's say in college at the start of the school year, and then at the end of the school year, I think you got yourself a pretty good situation there to at least take a deep dive look into it and say, like, we are looking at health, holistically, because I think a lot of times we talk about holistically and we say, nutrition, recovery, training, and stuff, but we don't ever look at the internal components because it's like, we just don't, and we haven't. And so with that, because we were talking a little bit offline, was like the anthropometric values of each individual and how unique they are. Now, I primarily work with basketball athletes, as we discussed, but understanding this and then programming based kind of upon that, or understanding the modifications that are required with, athletes that are so long levered. And there's even NFL athletes that are like this too. I mean, a lot of them are 6'6", 6'4" and above, I'm really going to say, where you start to say, okay, your limb ratio, your limb length, the levers with that is so unique and so different. Obviously, you can't change that because that's, bone and that structure. So I know this is something that you're passionate about, but like, how do we take that information then and now start to say, here's how we can help this individual better, rather than everybody's doing the back squat, everybody's doing this, everybody's just like, come on, let's not, put a freaking a square peg in a round hole, right?
Yeah, because every sport's going to have their own specific KPIs from a performance perspective of,
Sure.
What does speed mean for this sport or this position group, whether it's basketball, whether it's soccer, whether it's football, and what can we do to maximize every single person? So the unique thing about not just taking somebody and putting them in a bod pod or even a DEXA or an in-body, doing some more advanced anthropometric measurements is you actually get a chance to see what this person is, what is their makeup, and what does it actually tell you, as opposed to if somebody gets in a bod pod and comes out, all you get are these two different markers. You get fat-free mass and you get fat mass. It doesn't tell you, is this good or bad for that person? It just allows you to make comparisons to other people that have gotten the test that might be a part of the same sport or position group. But it doesn't tell you, like, hey, can this person actually put on more lean mass? Should they take it out? Where is it distributed? What is this person potentially going to be good at based on their height, their limb lengths, their ratios, their width? So getting a chance to measure an athlete and understanding that, and this is what we learned from Francis Holloway back in like 2018, is this methodology has been done quite a bit around the world, like in Europe and South America. It's gained more popularity and traction here in the States since like 2020.
Sure.
Is really, if you know the skeletal mass of an individual, how much muscle mass they have, so you get a ratio, you get this muscle to bone ratio. Where through skin folds where fat is deposited on a body. From a standing height and a seated height what percentage of their height is torso, or is it legs. You can do arm length to see what their wingspan is. You can also break it into the different parts of the arm. So for me, I'm 5'10", but I have a over 6'2" wingspan, and I'm all forearms. That's the thing. And you could probably see this if you've seen a lot of like Indian people, Middle Eastern people. It's, we're not very massive for the most part, especially on the Indian side. We've got long arms, long forearms. Some of us have like pretty broad chests with little tiny waists, really long femurs. Our tibias aren't very long, which in our bone breadths, like from not considering shoulder to shoulder, but waist is narrow, elbow is very, very narrow, knee is very narrow. So what that shows is the more width you have at those areas, the more potential for muscle mass that can be placed on them. Now, the two things that are going to govern that are you actually have genetic SNPs or genes that are very skewed towards people having like a massive amount of hypertrophy. But you also have the multi-site attachments of where does the insertion and origin point happen along that bone. And for me, for some of them, like you can put multiple fingers before the actual muscle belly starts.
Sure.
And I could try to hypertrophy as much as possible, but I'm not going to, this is where a tendon is. Like, I'm not going to be able to put more muscle there. I can get this muscle larger over time by really focusing on just straight hypertrophy, but is that how I want to train? Like a bodybuilder? I don't.
Well, is that beneficial for them then too, right? If we're talking sport performance, right?
Yeah. So what we want to do is if you can measure your particular sport and just get a sense of what certain position groups are, like you're going to see probably more similarities in football. Basketball is a little bit different because you can have a 6'10" guard or you can have a 6'4". It's more about skill and skill set for that position, but generally you're not going to have a 6'4" front court player.
Yeah.
Barkley days are long gone, you know?
Well, I also think of it as like, okay, if we're understanding, you know, their skeletal component and the ability for them to, and I'm going to say access range of motion, you know, maybe some just can't get hip internal rotation. And so, you know, we obviously like do any sort of squat pattern and people will criticize you, you know, so fast and be like, you obviously can't coach because that individual doesn't get, you know, ATG. And it's just like, well, maybe they don't have the ability to get that hip internal rotation because it's legitimately like limited. Like they just don't have that ability. It's like, okay, well then they're going to squat above parallel. Well, are we okay? We're fine with that then, right? So I think it's also understanding kind of the nuances of each individual and saying, where are this individual's limitations at from a skeletal standpoint? And how can I then understand and recognize that without trying to force them to get down low or get down, and they're like, my back hurts, coach. And then, you know, it's just like at times we could be doing potential harm when our number one goal is to never injure anyone.
Yeah, because you hit the nail right on the head there is you're going to have different limb lengths, especially for the lower body. So if we want to talk about squat, those that have longer femurs are going to be able in shallow, like from femoral issues, like some actually do, like theirs are just embedded really deep into their hip socket. So they can't, you know, internally rotate properly or externally rotate properly. So the range of motion is very poor. They might have just a large waist, you know, large hips, large ass, large legs. So their range of motion is just going to be in a very short area. Yeah. It doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means that that's ideal specifically for them. Sure. Now, those that have longer femurs and shallower hip sockets like myself, like I can get into a deep squat easily. I could sit in a deep squat I could probably test it, but maybe an hour with just down low all the way down. But that's just because they call it the Asian squat. Like, yeah, that's how some of us are built. I don't have very long tibias, so I can get down in that position pretty easily to where my ass is like this close from the ground. Yeah. Now, others shouldn't do that because to me that's natural. And I remember doing an FMS screen, which I was at a
yeah.
I was with a PT, just getting a little bit of rehab done because I was having some knee and other problems. And I'm like, yeah, let me just go to a professional because they know way more than I do.
Yeah.
And they, you know, had me do the FMS, you know, the overhead squat, and they're like, well, why are you getting down so low? I'm like, well, this is how I always squat. I feel comfortable doing it. And they're like, well, that's too low. Like, you need to squat to 90 degrees. So based on my proportions, me at 90 degrees, I'm way too flexed.
Sure.
I am in so much flexion, even though I feel like I'm a very flexible person. I mean, not perfect and not world beater, but well above average. Get into some really weird positions, but that's just normal to me. Yeah. And in my head, I'm thinking, if you force all of your athletes to just squat to a certain height or a certain way without recognizing their genetics, their buildup, their bone lengths and limbs, and their anthropometry, like you're just doing them a massive disservice. Now, also because of my long arms, front squat is very difficult for me because of how long my forearms are.
Sure.
Others that have short forearms, even if they have longer humerus, that's not a problem. But for me, like that is very difficult. So when I rest the bar on my shoulder, it's like legitimately cutting off my windpipe to get it in that position because this is so long. Like I have, like, look where the bar is going to be. Yeah. Same thing when I do a bench press. Like this is 90 degrees for me when I'm back. So there's this much distance when my arms are parallel to where the bar is. Like, you want me to bring that all the way down to my chest? This is how far back my shoulder's going to be. And I've had AC issues in both shoulders. So I'm never going to be a big bencher. One, because I'm not a massive dude. Two,
Sure.
because I just have massively long arms. And if I wanted a big bench, like, sure, I can bounce it off my chest because I'm not going to try to control that weight all the way down because it's going to put so much stress on my shoulders. So just thinking about these things in terms of what movement should our athletes do and what, based on their genetics and their anthropometry, allows them to be really good at. Like, what do they excel at? And can we build muscle around it? What does that mean for the field? Like, that we've seen too is those that have what they call this cruel index. You have longer tibias than fibias, or at least a better ratio of that. And there have been studies on this. You generate a lot more power from the ground. So you're going to be a better deadlifter. You're going to have a better vert. You are going to be potentially faster because if you have longer femurs, you're not going to be able to have that stride length. You might have to work a little bit harder on stride frequency, but that's all about generally like rate of force production and strength overall.
Yep.
Some people, it's harder for them to gain that strength if they are a smaller type of athlete too.
Yeah.
So really just figuring out what are your athletes actually potentially good at? What are they good at? What can they be good at? Instead of everybody needs to run a 4.3. Everybody needs to be 21, 22 miles an hour. Everybody needs to have a 300-pound clean, 400-pound, bench, 500-pound squat, 500 dead. I'm like, no, that's not what they need. You think these norms apply to everybody, and everybody's like, oh, 2 times body weight back squat. I'm like,
yeah.
In essence, if you're a high school, if you're a smaller school, you can only go by that. You're not doing these advanced metrics. But I'm talking about for every college that's got more than enough money, every professional team, if you're using like 1.7 or 2 times body weight, you're really missing the mark. Because it's more so about how much muscle mass compared to the actual skeletal mass somebody has, and seeing what those strength ratios mean for absolute and relative strength, instead of looking at, my 180-pound receiver needs to have a 360-pound back squat.
Yeah.
I'm like, not every 180-pound receiver is built the exact same. They're going to have way different makeup. Some might have a very high proportion of muscle compared to their bone, and that means they're not going to be that much stronger. Their ceiling is capped, as opposed to somebody that just might be on the low end. They're going to be able to get a lot stronger even at that same weight. And that's what I've been able to find and see. And that's basically how I've kind of tailored some of the individual stuff that I do for some athletes. And it really works really well.
It's interesting because I think the two things that, we've talked on is like, the internal markers, right? So getting your blood drawn, and then your skeletal makeup. And at times, and myself included, I think we tend to not take those into account when programming. And because it becomes really difficult. If I'm working with a team and, basketball is I'm going to say easier because you have less guys. Whereas, football, if I have 100 athletes in there at one time, which is what a lot of universities do, where I have 2 groups where it's, 60 athletes here and 60 athletes there, it becomes a question of like, okay, we can gather all this information, we can do all these things, but can we actually like implement that in a session, not only one session, but each session after that, and continuously then say, okay, these are my guys with these anthropometric values. We recognize and understand their strengths, weaknesses, and limitations. But what do we do with that, right? And then here are these other guys that really excel at that. So then do we just not have this guy, do anything? And I look at it, especially like for basketball players or wide receivers, right? If you can look at like the length of an individual's Achilles and then like, look at like how small their calves are. Typically, a lot of people with really long Achilles have really small calves, right? And then they're typically very jumpy, very fast. But it's like, well, that's not going to influence my programming. It's just something that I've noticed. I'm like, you can jump through the roof. And I'm like, your Achilles are just literally like half the length of your tibia. It's pretty fascinating. Wish I had that. But, so when we start kind of get these like structural components, like how do we then take it and make it practical, if that makes sense? Or do we not and just, you know what I'm saying? Or do we not and just say, when we start to see these things, we can reference back to it?
I think being able to gather the data to see having those research questions like, hey, are there massive differences amongst athletes within a sport, within a position group? Are there correlations to size, speed, and strength based on these anthropometric features and advanced metrics? If you're, a college or a pro team, do we see increased incidences of injury risk based on deficiencies in strength or, excessive amount of fat mass or adipose tissue or not enough muscle mass? That's when we can really start thinking about getting somebody in as a freshman, measuring them and say, okay, here's where you're at. This is where you potentially can be. Now, these are the potential movements that are really going to benefit you, and we're going to try to incorporate it into your workout. And then, maybe you can put them off by group instead of, offense, defense, O-line's here.
O-line, yeah.
We want to put you by the things that can help you become a better player to speak. And then again, it's easier to say than executing it, because executing it can be disastrous. Yeah. Again, with 100 plus players, trying to get through a single lift in a day is not easy at all, especially if you're limited on space and resources.
And time.
And time's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
But then also, once you measure somebody, it's like, what can we do with this guy's size? Like, does he need to gain? Does he need to get smaller? Where is he at? Like, does he stay in this position group, or should this athlete switch? And generally, most groups are going to mimic each other. Like your skill players mimic each other. Your O-line, D-line mimics each other. Skill players in terms of size for the most part, aside from tight ends, because they're a lot taller than your linebackers and your running backs. They're all going to mimic each other, but you might have somebody that hasn't done growing, or somebody that a coach really loves, like, oh yeah, he's our tight end, but we're going to move him to tackle. I'm like, well, yeah, just because he's 6'5" doesn't mean he needs to be a tackle. If you want 310, 315 pound tackles with long arms, and generally what we see with really good tackles is they have shorter torsos because they have longer legs, because they have to be very quick, very explosive, as opposed to your center and guards. They're going to be shorter, they're going to be wider, they're going to be stockier. They're generally going to hopefully generate the most power, because those guys, especially on both sides of the ball, are guiding double teams or taking on double teams, depending on, your nose, your 3, whatever. If genetically you're forcing a guy to just put on weight, they can put on weight, but you're always going to have an upper limit of how much muscle mass you can put on. And just because somebody has that ability to, if they're a skill player, you don't want to maximize muscle mass on certain positions because of what they're required to do. So sometimes, like you said, we have these coaches that fall in love with just the prototype, but it's like it ends up becoming square peg round hole. I remember in 17, this is when Odell was the top 3 receiver. The GM comes to me and Aaron's like, Odell needs to be 210 pounds or like something crazy, like 2. I was like, this dude's like 5'10", 5'11", like just insanely powerful, super fast. He's not a mass monster. Like he operates at 193 or so, plus or minus, whatever it is. Give him that 1% cushion. Right. I'm like, if he puts on 15 pounds, like where's it gonna go? First off, and what is that gonna do for his mobility? Like his body control is off the charts.
Yes.
His movement is seamless. He's fast. He can accelerate, like, catch a slant and take it to the
100%.
He's not going to be the guy on the outside catching 50-50 balls against you. That's not his MO. I'm like, you're just going to ruin him just because, Julio Jones or Megatron or whatever is just a big, tall. I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. So I think a lot of times if you have that data and you can really like, it's perfect where he's at. We don't need to do anything in terms of increasing his weight, increasing muscle mass. We need to keep this guy healthy. Working on all those other things that we talked about, like his behaviors and the internal systems, and physical is not what's lacking.
Yeah. It's interesting because, what we just spent several minutes talking on, people will simply just, an easy way to say is like, what can their frame handle? Like, what is their frame? Right? Like that's a very street way of saying it. Like, what is their frame handle? What's their frame? What can their frame hold? And it's like, well, what we're talking about is the anthropometric values of that individual. Like we're talking about their structural component. We're talking about their capacity, their ability to not only like handle that, but then how can they move with that potential additional weight? How can they, there's so many guys. There's so many people that are great examples, especially on the O-line side or D-line side, where they put weight on literally just to play the sport, right? And they're an unhealthy individual playing at the highest level. And as soon as they get done, they drop 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 pounds. And they feel better, they look better, like all that stuff. There's so many examples of it. And so it's really interesting to see, that aspect and to have, in that example, like to have somebody like an Odell be like, oh, he's got to be 210. It's like, I mean, sure, potentially, could he get to be 210? Absolutely, he probably could. But like, what negative consequences come with that? Like, there's second and third order effects that come with them just to be like, well, we have a 210 receiver as well. I mean, it's just like, does he want to be there? Does he, I'm like, there's so many other questions that go from that. And it's just like, like, what if he was 197, 198? Like, like, it's not the weight that really determines, but we put so much stock in it. Like, we put so much stock, especially in the football side of the house, of like, the guy weighs 240, the guy weighs 310, he's 330. Like, there's so much stock put into that, which is really interesting.
Yeah, like sports in general are just unhealthy. Just the volume of training, the travel, the amount that they do, the physical exertion, especially contact sports. Like, there's nothing healthy about football. There isn't a single football player that isn't dealing with something outside of, like a kicker or a punter. But even they get injured, it blows my mind that actually happens. Yeah. But it does. But the lineman piece is very interesting because now with modern day football, it's all about just extreme speed and extreme size. Yeah. But the unique thing about them is they have these massive skeletal frames that can handle that. Even these players that are 320, 330, and you think like, oh, they're 28, they're 30% body fat, it's horrible. Like, their frames are so big, yeah, they can handle it and still be just dominant on either side of the ball, which is crazy. But to your point, when we're talking about the optics of head coaches loving athletes just being jacked, and strength coaches love it too, like, oh, this guy is gaining 10 pounds or 20 pounds or 30 pounds in a summer. Like, they're now playing one of the most vigorous physical sports with insane amount of exertions at a weight they've never done before. Like, can their body handle that? Because we know that muscle can grow pretty quickly in some of these kids, but bone, tendons, ligaments, can they sustain the same force exerted over and over again? Now it's an increased amount of force.
Right.
And that would be ideal in a scenario where, hey, these kids are eating well, they have no blood glucose dysregulation, they can handle stress appropriately, their HRVs are trending in the right direction when they need to, no micronutrient deficiencies, like all of that stuff, like inflammatory markers are under control. But we know in the real world, they're not. They don't sleep very well. They're on the phone constantly. They're drinking. You're doing every and anything that is negatively affecting their health while playing sports that are just continuously breaking them down. So you have a kid that puts on X amount of muscle over the course of a summer, and then you go into a camp and it's like, oh, soft tissue, groin, hamstring, left, right, front,
Achilles.
Center. Achilles.
Yes.
Achilles. And it's like, well, why is this happening? It's like, you're not thinking methodically about what this specific athlete needs, or you didn't give him enough time to actually handle it.
Yeah. It was two things here. It was really interesting when COVID happened, and then, the NFL sent everybody home, right? And then they came back and it was like, oh, we're in training camp, and a very, 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 very short, and you were in the NFL at the time, but like a very short build up to the season. And what did we see? An insane increase in injury risk and major injuries. We're not talking like small, like, he rolled an ankle. Like, no. We're talking like Achilles. We're talking, other major injuries that occurred. And it's just like the physical load preparation and the build up to what is required of a sport at a high level clearly was not there. And now these guys are suffering from those things. And it just goes to show, it's just like, man, like, you can't just throw professional athletes who do this for their job, their career, in a very short build-up period and say, good luck, because they are going to get injured, unfortunately, which is what nobody wants,
No. And it just goes to show that, if you appropriately program and periodize for the entire year, like, you can train at a high level intelligently. And it's exactly what athletes need to do. Yep. It's when they take more time off than they need to. And it's why I hate the NFL offseason, especially for kids that are transitioning out of college football into like your combine training. The combine just finished up last week.
Yeah.
I told 2 of the guys I'm working with, hopefully they're, like 2nd-round draft picks, if not better. Like they're training with somebody, getting ready for that. And, I'm doing, blood tests, getting them an aura, just getting their minds ready for what rookie minicamp is. And when they get the opportunity to get signed by a team, whenever it is after the draft, like this is life in the NFL. Like you can't get away with the same habits you had in college and expect to be an automatic starter, because everybody you're going up against now is as good as you, if not better. So I texted them, good luck. Like, hey, we're going to debrief when things are done, and then we're really going to get started, because all that combine training to me is it's a waste of time. Like they just missed out on 2 months of things that they could potentially actually be doing to focus on becoming a better football player and mentally being ready and prepared to handle a full NFL season.
It's man, it's really interesting, speaking of the combine. And for those of you that aren't in tune with anything in the sports world, like the NFL combine is, I'm just going to put out there, the biggest joke probably. And here's why I say that is because we do these arbitrary tests that have a small correlation to what's actually required for their sport. And what I mean by that is like some of the stuff, is okay, but some of it is just like, they're never going to do that in sport. Like that shouldn't matter. Like I'm going to use the bench press for an example. Okay, cool. Like how many reps can you do at 225 bench? Well, guess what? That has zero correlation to what's required in sport, regardless of position. Even O-line, D-line, who literally, you can argue like they push every play. It's not a muscle, like when they do that test, it's not a test of strength. It's a test of muscle endurance, right? Mm-hmm. And so like particularly in that movement pattern. Well, that is not what's required in their sport at all. And we know that if you know the sport, if you know training at all, like that's not required. So like, why is that even a big deal? Like, why is that something that, like we should be asking? I think the broad is important. I think the vert is interesting. The 40 you can make an argument on as well. I would love to see like curvilinear running, because that's what they do more in sports than what they do straight. Like if you ever get even the guys that break out, right? Whether it's a running back or whether it's a receiver, it's not that they're running a straight line typically. Like you might get that once or twice in the game, but that's really about it. Maybe special teams more often than anything, but it's always, some sort of curvilinear running. It's always some sort of angled running. And so it's just very interesting for us to put on this dog and pony show. And that's how we evaluate people. But it's like, did we just forget that they have 4 to 5 years of tape that is we should actually be evaluating them on, because what they did then is actually what's going to be required in their career, their job going forward, at least for the next 3 years, because that's how the average timeline in the NFL. But it's just very interesting to me to see the combine.
Yeah, and again, I'm glad it's over, and these kids are going to be training for pro day if they didn't do everything that they wanted to, or if they want to improve their scores too. But as you said, they've looked at studies, and there's no actual measure for success in the combine that translate into longevity in an NFL career. Draft stock, draft position, it's there, but obviously if you have better metrics, you're going to be potentially drafted higher anyway. Right. Same thing with NFL success. If we're looking at money too, there's no correlation between any of those metrics. So it's like, because it's a huge draw, there's a lot of money involved. It's, a glamorous event. They're going to keep doing it. But to me, they focus on training for those specific modalities that they get tested on, and not like, hey, this is what life is going to be like in the NFL. Because now I'm going to be on my own. I don't have a college coach that's going to be scheduling every day. 24 hours a day, telling me what the workouts I need to be doing, what to eat, all that stuff. They have to
how to manage my finances too.
How to manage my finances and time. Where am I going to live? Like I might be cut in a day. What do I do after that? Like this team might not provide the appropriate resources for me, because a lot of NFL teams just don't have the facilities or, the money available like colleges do, in terms of, or the owners just don't want to. They don't want to pony up the money because the players are getting paid a good amount, so they should take care of it themselves, not knowing a lot of the players just don't know what to do. So that's what they should be focused on, to say, hey, I'm going to be in a rookie mini camp. It's going to be 3 days. it's not going to be like the hardest practice of my life, but I want to show out. So yeah, mentally I want to be dialed in. I want to be energetic. I don't want to cramp. I want to, have great effort. I want to recover to be able to go really hard the next day. If I'm a fringe player, like if you're the draft pick, then you're cool, but you also want to still prove that you're the guy that they are hoping
that this is the reason why they drafted you as well. Yeah.
And then it rolls over into the rest of the OTAs. And then whenever they have the veteran minicamp, so now you're with your full team. And like, oh, this is the rookie, this is, the high level rookie. You might get, made fun of by the vets. They'll have you like carry the pads in and a little bit of hazing and singing songs. But you're still on your own. You got to figure everything else out. Like, how do I take care of myself? How do I deal with adversity now that I didn't have a good rookie minicamp where everybody's so much faster or bigger than I thought, unless I'm just one of these freaks.
Yeah.
Those are the things that they physically need to get ready for.
Yeah. And like the mental fatigue too, because it's what people forget a lot of times, especially for the rookies, is it's not just like I have to physically perform, but I also need to now know the playbook. I also need to now know like all of the different calls, all the different checks, all the different routes. And I've never been at that level, but I'm sure it's not. Hey, it might be it might be the full playbook, study it, know it all, but it might be like, hey, we're just gonna piecemeal you into this. It's really interesting because everybody's calls are different, everybody's checks are different, everybody calls things different ways. So there's also a large mental fatigue and mental stressor component of like knowing the playbook, and that's a big deal because if you don't know what you're doing, you're not playing. That's just the bottom line. And then to that other point, and this is probably our last thing, but like, the NFL Players Association just came out, and I think if you know sports at all, you saw this, and I think people are amazed by the grades that organizations got. And, with that, it's like we all think if you're not in the NFL as an athlete, a coach, or a part of that organization, we think like they have the best of everything. Like it's given, right? Because we're at the highest level. It's given they have hot tub, cold tubs. It's given that, they have food, buffet style for them, literally 3 to 4 meals a day, every day, right? Like, but what the reality becomes is like players pay for that, right? It's taken out of their check. They don't have hot and cold tubs. They don't have all the recovery modalities. They don't get food on the road. Like, it's actually mind-blowing at some of this stuff because it's just like, where's that missing link? Because these are the people at the highest level, right? Like in college, we obsess about these things. So it's like, why is the NFL, why are some of these organizations failing at them? It's very interesting.
Yeah, and fortunately, I worked in an organization that's very first class, and they had probably some of the top marks, which is awesome. And it's just, it's a reflection on ownership, really. That's what it comes down to. Sometimes when you see a poor score, like the training room's bad, or the food area is small, or the weight room's old, it's like those coaches and practitioners can't control that. Like this is the environment that they've been put in. That's all on ownership, and historically, it's been very well known there are certain organizations that do invest in their players and others that don't. And look, it doesn't mean that if you do, you're automatically going to get wins, but in a league where the majority of games are decided by one score or less, whatever you can do to control as many factors, provide a benefit, environment, a culture, I love the word culture, or a space that allows your athletes to feel comfortable where they're at, not have any contempt or any issue or negative feelings, which are going to, they're going to happen regardless. But overall, I mean, you're going to have a general consensus that happens amongst the team. And those that were rated low, I've had former players that, I was with the Giants that ended up making a free agent splash because, that team's going to give more money, knowing that the organization in and of itself doesn't provide a lot of resources. It's not great. The leadership isn't there. So that's a big part of it. So when you see some of those marks, like it's easy to just point the finger at the person in that department that runs it, but without understanding the nuance and everything behind it. That's why I said some stuff. People were saying like all these nutrition scores are very bad. I'm like, maybe they're just rating the actual facility, and not the actual food, or the food service operation was a contract signed, that goes over 5 years or 10 years, and you have to use that person. And the person in charge of that on the other side is not very willing to play ball, or you have a very small food service budget. Or like you said, some teams charge their players to eat, lunch or an additional meal, to take that food home, with others are cognizant about, hey, you don't have the means to cook at home, or you struggle with that, or you have goals, and we can help take care of that because our food here is good. But on the flip side too, there are people that should take accountability and ownership of their own specific area, because we can't assume that just because you work for a professional team, you're the best strength coach, the best trainer, the best dietitian, because that's not true at all. Correct. It's any league throughout the entire world, you're going to have good and bad. That's just how it is. And just because the team has success doesn't mean that that staff is good. It just means that those players are really, really, really good. Same thing in college too. Like, that's a big misconception about the training staff or the strength and conditioning staff or whatever. It's like, if you swap out those coaches and practitioners for somebody else, you'll probably get the same results. If you swap out the players, you will not get the same results at all.
And it's really interesting because let's say a organization inside, like a department inside of those organizations got rated bad. Those people probably lost their jobs, right? So if it's the nutritionists or strength and conditioning, or the chefs or the training tables or whatever, from an owner standpoint, and what we're saying is, like, the owners are the hardest to remove, right? Obviously, obviously. But at the same time, they are also the oldest, at times misinformed or undereducated. Not because they don't necessarily care. Maybe there's some level of that, but they're the first ones to say, you no longer have a job, right? Because we can't have our organization like that. And this is kind of the same thing from a collegiate standpoint, right? Like, a lot of times the struggle is with the higher level leadership, the administrators, because you don't have the autonomy or whatever the case may be. But you're also, like, if you're running a department, whatever the case may be, you might be the first one to get axed. You're the last hired and then the first one gone. And that's where it's really frustrating, because, like you said, you could have the best coaches in there. You could have the best practitioners or not. And regardless, it at times seems like it just doesn't matter, right? And so, like, you could be the best strength coach, you could be the best nutritionist, you could be the best, AT, you could be the best, or whatever the case may be. And this is no shade to them, because I think there's people that do exceptionally well. They just don't get their love. And there's people that are at D2 schools or D3 schools or low D1 schools that are heads and shoulders above people at Power 5 or people at a professional level. And so it's very interesting to that. But it's just it's hard, because it's like, how do we bridge that gap then with owner, GM, head coach, administration, to say, hey, like, what we're doing is really good. We might have had a bad report card on this one time, but we can change things, and here's what we need to do, right? It's just essentially like owning a mistake or owning whatever the case is, is taking responsibility of that. But a lot of times in a league, in a game, in a industry where you got to win and you got to win now, there typically is no wiggle room for we made a mistake, let's fix it. It's like, we made a mistake, and they say, you're the mistake, and we're going to remove you, right? It's sad at times with that, it's just interesting to understand.
Yeah. And if places are good about just policing themselves and having the standards set, say, hey, this is what you're in charge of, this is what you're going to be evaluated on, the criteria, and you know what it is, and you can acknowledge it, and you have something to go off of. So when you come into work every day, aside from, wanting to positively contribute to the team, it's like, this is what I'm trying to achieve. Yeah. Whether it's injury reduction or a lot of that stuff, sometimes you just don't have any control over. But if everybody's on par and knows what they're in charge of and gets the opportunity to get evaluated, to say, hey, you didn't hit your mark, but we still believe in you, we're going to give you a second chance, then give them the opportunity to actually fix it, as opposed to if you don't police it and then all of a sudden these results come out and nobody knew, like nobody told somebody that they were doing their job poorly.
Right.
And all of a sudden it probably has led to people getting let go. And I hope that at least they had been warned prior, even if they were bad at what they do. Because if you let years of bad work go, that's the person at the tip top or whoever's in charge of overseeing those areas, that's their fault for letting that slide. And it happens all too often, unfortunately. And even even doing something like getting a third party to do an external audit, somebody that has no, horse in the race, that isn't going to be biased to say like, look, I'm going to kind of just take a look at all the different areas you have and say like, hey, this is what's good. This is what needs improvement. This is what's not so good. And then bring everybody to the table to say like, this is what we want to try to do to rectify the situation.
Yeah.
And then give them the opportunity to, because you hired these people in the first place. And if you didn't want them, you shouldn't have hired them to begin with. And then you go through the rounds again. If they still aren't good enough, or again, the grades come back and they're the same, if not poor, then you move in the next direction. I think that's the fault of a lot of places. It's you let things slide for too long. You turn a blind eye. There's nepotism. There's favorites. And it just doesn't work out the way that you generally want it to.
Or it's the good old boy club. And so like, hey, I know so-and-so and they probably are a good person. I think the majority of people are good people and they want to do well and want to contribute positively, but it's a good old boy club. And it's like, I'm just not going to hold them to that standard. You know what I'm saying? Because they're my friend or, whatever. And it's like, well, no, like if they are your friend, you should hold them to that, right? Like the highest form of love is like holding you to that component of it, right? The highest form of respect is like holding you to that standard. The highest form of that is like holding you to that. So it's like, if they are your friend, if they are somebody that you really appreciate, like if they are slipping, you should have that conversation and it should be well received because they understand where the place that's coming from rather than just like, it's my friend, like not a big deal. But sadly, you see that happen, right? Like they're my friend, they stay in their tight little circle. They, like they've been friends for however long. And then, it's just that component, right? So it's very interesting to see that. It's very interesting to see what the players think. And then, like we said before, or off air, is like, I'd be interested to see that at like a collegiate level. I'd be interested to see that at a Power 5 level, at a collegiate level, because I think we would then be also amazed at the results from players and coaches and everything else. But I don't foresee that ever happening. Or definitely not.
I think the whole thing too is if you're gonna survey college kids, they have nothing to compare it against. So they don't know what a good training program is for the most part versus a good training staff versus a good nutrition staff. Most of these NFL players, they've been around the block, so they kind of know. They've either hired their own people, been able to kind of educate themselves over time. Because you see everything on whether it's social media, it's posts, it's like this college player is like, I have the best training staff in the nation, or we have the best we have the best nutrition, we have the best this, that, and third. And it's like, well, how do you know? It's stupid to put labels like that because everybody's situation is different. The players you're working with, the resources you have, the money that's allocated, the autonomy that's given, all of that is completely different. So people that succeed in one area might struggle when they get put in a different situation with similar or less or greater resources. We don't know about that.
Yeah, there's so much context that has to be there for each individual. But hey, I want to be respectful of your time, but I want to thank you for coming on today and having your knowledge and continuously just the thought process of like, how do we continue to improve and help our athletes and obviously winning's a big deal, right? But like, how do we continue to do things a little bit differently? And so I think it's really unique, the perspective you have, what you're currently doing, what you have done, what you're currently doing, what you're going to do as well. And so I want to say thank you very much. I appreciate you. I appreciate your time. If people aren't following you, which if they aren't, that's a huge mistake on them. But if they aren't, where can they find you at?
Yeah, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. My handle is at Pratik X Patel. Same one for all three. So I try to post on each platform just daily, a little bit of different things on each one, but mainly on Twitter, and then kind of just expanding on certain topics on Instagram too.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. If you are not following him, do yourself a huge favor, go follow him because he puts out easily digestible and actionable information in the world of, and not just limited to, but primarily in the worlds of sports performance, nutrition, dietetics, and stuff. And so I've followed him for a long time. I'm like, this dude puts out continued top tier information that's just like, that makes a lot of sense. I can implement that. I can actually take this information and do something with it and apply it to my life, apply it to my situation rather than just, oh, cool, right? You know what I'm saying? And so many people are. So he does a great way of differentiating himself with very easily digestible information that you can take action upon. and that helps you understand things on a multitude of topics and on a multitude of information and performance recovery. And it's not just limited to that, but there's so much out there. So do yourself a favor, go follow him on both platforms and reach out to him and ask questions. So guys, if you got any sort of information, if you got educated, if you got entertained from this or encouraged, do us a huge favor. Like I said at the beginning, if you're on Spotify, give us a review. It literally takes 10 seconds. Share with a friend. That's the only way the show grows. If you are watching on YouTube still, if you are, much appreciate that. But leave a comment and hit the subscribe button, and then reach out to him and let him know what a great job that he did. Because I've continued to learn a lot. I think we can continue to talk for another 3, 4, 5 hours on the on each individual facet of everything. Right? There's so many rabbit holes that we can go down. But I want to say thank you for your time. Thank you for everything today. I look forward to more conversations with you in the future, and seeing how we can continue to impact not only players, not only coaches, but the lives of everybody else, and give them a better situation that they can be in for longer periods of time. So appreciate your time, man. And we'll catch you guys on the next one. So thank you guys very much.